My name's Richard Harvey, and I actually, when people say, how do you know that you're Jewish, I normally just start talking about my family, because they come from Germany. And my great-great-great-grandfather was Salomon Hertz Hirschland, who was born in Germany, came from Germany, Steinheim, to a place called Essen in 1766. And if you say, how do you know that he was Jewish? I can take you back to 1400, and I can take you even further back. But this is just my introduction, so I'm not going to do that. But for me, I was always brought up knowing that we were Jewish. All my grandparents, my great-grandparents, coming from Germany, and Jewish, both on the male and female side. And in 1910, my family were responsible for building this lovely synagogue in Essen in Germany. If you go there, it is still standing today. And the list of the people building the synagogue, there's a list, and it says here Hirschland. And there's even a list of people who gave money for the building of the Hirschland, for the building of the synagogue. But you can see up here Adolf Hirschland. Now, there was an Adolf Hitler who came along, so that wasn't such a popular name. And can you see their brothers Hirschland? That was my great-grandfather, Richard Hirschland, who had already moved to England. So that's there. So when in 1939 the synagogue was destroyed, was set fire to by the Nazi Party, my great-grandfather, Richard Hirschland, was already safe in London. And I give thanks to God, because I would not be here today unless my great-grandfather, Richard Hirschland, and two of his brothers came to England. So this is a very personal thing for me. And it's my story. It is also a typical story of Jewish people in Europe and in England. So when they came, that was Richard Hirschland, my great-grandfather, and he came from Essen. That was the family home, and this was the family bank. Not all Jews are rich, by the way, and not all Jews are successful, but my great-great-grandfather's brother was Simon Hirschland, who had a bank that was a private bank in Germany. And it was one of the last banks that the Nazi Party in Germany took. In fact, they took everything. They took the home, they took the bank, the lives of many of my family who did not escape from Germany, and all we have left is a public square and an underground station. Now, this is my typical English, British Richard Harvey humour. So again, it's nothing particularly Jewish, but you hear the sadness in my voice. They lost the home, they lost the bank, but there is now a memorial, the Hirschland place, the place of the Hirschland family, and even an underground station in Essen. I would prefer a bank and a home, but there you go. So then my great-great-grandfather, Richard Hirschland, his son, Sidney Hirschland, was my grandfather, and he was born Sidney Moses Hirschland. Moses was a family name. Hirschland was a family name, but he was told, Hirschland, you should change your name. You want a nice British-sounding name, because we are at war with Germany. And Hirschland is a very Jewish name. So a nice English name. Now, there is a famous English sherry. It's an alcoholic drink called Harvey's Bristol Cream Sherry. I'm sure you wouldn't drink, but... and so it's a typically English name. It's quite by accident. But my father was born Anthony Adolf Hirschland, because Adolf was still a popular boy's name. And he was at the age of 6, I think, he was told, you are now no longer Hirschland, you are now Harvey. Jolly good show, very English name. But I was born Richard Simon Harvey after my great-grandfather Richard Hirschland, and Simon Hirschland was another one. And I was born in 1956, so you can tell I'm 57 years old. Are you same age? What's your birthday?
June.
Ah, you're an old man. October. He's much older than me. It was a good year, wasn't it?
Very good year.
Yes. So really, that's my introduction, and also just to say, if you would like my story in detail, and also my wife's story, because she also is Jewish and believes in Jesus, but I'm Jewish. A Jew for Jesus tells his story. So my job today is that we have 4 sessions, is that right? Yes. Who are the Jewish people? What do Jewish people believe? A history of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, and the differences between Judaism and Christianity. Now, I have to say that where you have 2 Jews, you have how many opinions?
3.
5. You're wrong. 7, whatever, 3. So I am simply giving you my own understanding of these historical and theological and biblical issues. But I have been studying this for a few years. I became a believer in Jesus in 1974. And my big question is, why don't my people know that Jesus is the Messiah? Why haven't the Christians shared the gospel in love? And why do my people, when I became a believer, my Jewish friends said, forget this Jesus business. Come back to the synagogue and be a nice Jewish boy. And my Christian friends, I heard them saying, now that you have become a Christian, you are no longer a Jew. The old has passed away. The new has come. So you can tell I was caught in the middle. And that made me study and think and become a missionary to my people and a theologian to some extent. I'm still asking these questions. So when you ask me that question right at the beginning, how do you know you are Jewish? I answer it with another question. How do you know anything? Ask God is one way. And then each one of us, as we grow in our faith as disciples, we find out who we are called to be and who God has made us. I did not choose to be born male. I did not choose to be born British. I did not choose to be born Jewish. I did not really want to believe in Jesus. But I have to accept God's call on my life. And Jesus sets you free to be all you are meant to be. I pray that you too will know God's calling and your identity in Christ. So now let me come to my subject, and I realize I've taken a few minutes of introduction, but I hope you will see me not just as a guest lecturer, but as a Jewish friend. Who has Jewish friends already? Yeah. Does anybody not have any Jewish friends? Because the best Jewish friend you can ever have is Jesus. And if you're not sure that Jesus is your best Jewish friend, then I hope you will know that very soon. Hebrew is from the Hebrew word avar, let's say that, avar, to cross over, which is what Abraham did when he came from Ur in the Chaldees. Where did he come from? He came from Ur, and he came over to Canaan. It's also a word that scholars use which is connected to the word hapiru, which may mean a social outcast or even a mercenary. That's one word. Another word, Israel. Ish Yashar El is the man who is righteous with God. Ish Sa'el, the man who is a prince with God. Ish Tsara El, the man who wrestles with God. There are many different explanations of this word. My preference is Ish Yashar El. And then Disraeli is the modern Israelite. So people who live in the land of Israel. And again, we have Israel in the north and Judah in the south, in the biblical land of Israel. This is the 10th century, the time of King David. But it often, both of these things go together. So Judah, Yehudah, praise, is the southern kingdom, and Israel the northern kingdom, the 10 northern tribes. But this name Judah then becomes the name for the Jewish people. After Ezra and Nehemiah return from exile in Babylon, in around the year 520, 486, the Jewish people are all called Yahud, Yehudim, Jews. But even that word, Jew, is really talking about Judeans. Jewish becomes religious and ethnic and cultural identity. And even today, most Jews are not very religious. You think that's terrible. They should all love God with all their heart, all their soul, all their strength. But many Jewish people are very secular. And we are good atheists or agnostics. So Jewish is both ethnic and cultural as well as religious. And then Judeans referred in the Bible times to the province of Judah and even to those in Jerusalem. We are reading John 17. Wonderful upper room discourses. I love the way you say the Lord's Prayer, the high priestly prayer. That takes place in Jerusalem, but Jesus is from Galilee. Sometimes Galileans are contrasted with Judaioi, Judeans in Jerusalem. And then Judaism, we talk about today, the religion of the Jewish people. And where you have two Jews, you have how many opinions? Too many. So there is Orthodox, Reform, Liberal, Reconstructionist, Humanist, even Messianic Judaisms today. So, and then we have the word Semite, or from the descendants of Shem. So when you hate the Jews, you are an anti-Semite. But even the Arabs are Semites, descended from Shem. So if you are anti-Arab, you are also anti-Semite. So the question, who is a Jew? This is a question we have asked for thousands of years. Now, I answer the question with a question. When you want to ask who is a Jew, the next question is, who wants to know? And why do you need to know? So David Ben-Gurion, when the modern state of Israel began, asked many wise Jewish leaders for this answer, who is a Jew? And the normal answer is the answer of Orthodox Jews, the rabbis, who say that if your mother is Jewish, you are Jewish, or if you convert to Judaism, you are Jewish. For a man, that means circumcision, painful operation, ritual bath, and at the time of Jesus, offering sacrifice in the temple. It normally involves a course of instruction of at least a year. So the rabbis of the Orthodox synagogue say if your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish, or if you convert to Judaism. Reform Jews, you will see there are many Reform synagogues in England. In America, it is the largest denomination of Jews. Say either if your father is Jewish or your mother is Jewish. So they do not agree with the Orthodox, because where you have two Jews, you have lots of opinions. And then in the Bible, Reform definition, patrilineal through the father, matrilineal through the mother. The biblical definition sometimes goes through the father, sometimes goes through the mother. Ruth is a Moabite woman. The rabbis say she converted to Judaism. But it doesn't say that in the text itself. In fact, she is always known as a Moabite, even when we trace the genealogy of Jesus. So the discussion was going on in those days, and it will continue today. And for me, the real question is not who is a Jew, but what does it mean to be a true Jew, a good Jew? And for me, as a Messianic Jew, to know Jesus is to know what it means to be truly Jewish. But most Jewish people don't have that definition. So for many of us, it's our religious affiliation. Which synagogue do we belong to? It's also membership of a community and a culture. Not really a religious definition at all. And it's belonging to a particular ethnic group. And we're looking at that in this section. So where are the Jewish people? Well, we are just about everywhere. I was in Malaysia, they're there. I was in Thailand, they're there. Everywhere. Even here in Finchley, there are Jewish people. So we are scattered. There's about 13.9 million. That's about 0.2% of the 6.5, is it, or 6.7 billion people in the world. By the way, in 1939, just before the Holocaust, the destruction of 6 million Jewish people, there was an estimated 17 million. So 3 generations later, we are still going through post-traumatic stress disorder, because our numbers have not come back to what they were at the time of the Second World War. But we're growing slowly. So it's reckoned that there are 7 million in the diaspora, that's the scattering, that's outside of Israel, about 56%. And Israel, 6.18 million, about 44%. These figures are not always precise. It depends what the survey methodology is that is done to calculate them. And this is a 2012 set of estimates. But really what is happening is that Jewish people are moving out of diaspora and into Israel, and the Israeli population is growing faster than other populations, except maybe Germany, for an interesting reason. So the enlarged or expanded Jewish population stands at approximately 18.2 million. Now this again is how demographers talk. According to the rabbis, you're Jewish if 2 things. What are they? If your mother is Jewish or you convert to Judaism. But the demographers are also interested in this figure that includes those with a Jewish father or spouse. Your wife is Jewish, you're not Jewish, but in some ways you are part of the Jewish community, as well as children living in a household with a Jewish step-parent. This is particularly true in America, and even in Australia. There's some Aussies here, aren't there? So you have a sort of expanded Jewish group that the rabbis don't count officially, but they would have been arrested by Hitler. And they would have been sent to the concentration camps also. So if we look at the projections, 1970, it's estimated about 12 million Jewish people. 27, which was when I did this figure, 13 million. By 2020, it's still about the same. We do not have that many children unless you are very Orthodox. And then you should have 8 or 10 or 20 children if you can. Israel is becoming the largest, 6.2 million. North America, 5.5 million. Europe, smaller, 1 million. And within that figure, we have around 482,000, 490,000 in France. Si tu parles français, c'est très utile. Il faut aller être missionnaire à Paris. If you speak French, it's very useful because you can go be a missionary in Paris and the food is wonderful because it's Sephardi, it's not Ashkenazi. And the French Jews are much more anxious about the situation, but they are also more spiritually open, many of them. And then you have United Kingdom. When I was around young, 390,000, but declining and continuing to decline to about 238,000. Germany, because of Russian Jews coming to Germany from 30,000 to 120,000, and now also probably heading to decline. So these figures means that wherever you are, you might meet Jewish people. But what I think is important is that when we look at the map of Europe today, it's not in your book, but you can see we're scattered. And the British Jewish community, we think we're the most important, but the French think they're the most important, and the Germans, they're the most important, and the Israelis, we all think that we're the heart of the Jewish community. But we're really not. We're part of many different small diaspora groups, and we take our identity from Israel as well and the United States. But wherever you go in Europe, you'll meet some Jewish people. Are you still with me okay?
Yes.
Let's look a bit at the British Jewish community, which is the one I grew up in, and so it's the one I'm most at home in. Is it growth? Is it decline? Or is it stagnation? Well, a bit of everything. 1882 to 1913, it grew because of people coming from Russia and Poland, fleeing the Tsar, fleeing persecution and the pogroms, we call them, to about 16.7 million. Oh, that's the world population. And then there. So this world population. And we've got this decline, but we're still less than 2% of the world population. And Messianic Jews are less than 2% of 2% of 7.6 billion. So we are a minority of a minority of a minority. But the truth is not always on the side of the majority. In England, that was my English thing, there's a 40% decline from 450,000 in 1950, nearly when some of us were born, 56, to about 275,000. These are the official estimates, but in fact you could double this number to get those who are not counted in these figures. Who's this man? Does anybody know who he is? Allan Sugar, very famous TV personality, Jewish businessman, typical British Jew, self-made businessman. He has a wonderful TV program, The Apprentice, where he gives people jobs and you're fired if you don't do the job properly. Typical British character. Now, 45,000 out of a total UK Jewish population of 280,000 are ultra-Orthodox, very strict, and therefore having lots of children as well. The seculars are declining by about 2% a year. That's most of my family, not all of them. Intermarriage, 50% of Jewish people in this country are marrying partners who are not Jewish. That's true for my family, for example. Although my wife is Jewish, I recommend a Jewish wife, but you should marry the person of God's choice. So the secular average 1.65 children, but strictly Orthodox women, the very religious women, some of them have an average of 6.9 children. And some have up to 15 children. That's a lot of children. So the Bible says, be fruitful and multiply. Not everybody does that though. We have 2 children and I have 1 grandchild. I recommend grandchildren. They're much easier. So who's this? Does anybody know? Isaac Disraeli. Benjamin Disraeli? Yes, Benjamin Disraeli. First British Jewish Prime Minister. Although he had to be officially converted to Christianity, his father had him baptized when he was a young child, because you were still not legally allowed to be Jewish in the House of Parliament. But he's one of our great Jewish figures. And he said, I am the blank page between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So he didn't really believe very much. But he knew he was Jewish, and he became a prominent prime minister. So we have roughly these figures, quite small populations. You know, I walk around Tel Aviv and there's a couple of million Israeli Jews just living in the Tel Aviv area. And you go to the greater New York area and there's 2 or 3 million Jewish people there. So we're talking about small populations and a small total, but we are survivors. We've been here hundreds of years. We were thrown out in 1290. But we came back in, sometimes in secret, and then in 1665 we were allowed back in, and then German Jews and Spanish Jews and Russian Jews, and now we have Israeli Jews who all come to Britain. Yeah, I'm very interested in what is happening in Israel and in America. So we've just this year had a very important survey done in America, which looks at the 6 or even 10 million Jews in America. Depends how you count them. We are also looking at Jews who have a practice of religion or no practice of religion. And they discovered that there were 78% of Jews who practice their religion, 22% who do not practice their religion. And they looked at the young Jews, the millennials, who were born after 1980. Particularly. And they found very interesting figures. So what they include is a whole group of people. Jews by religion, Jews who practice their religion, 54%. Jews of no religion, they don't practice their religion, but they are counted as Jews. Non-Jews of Jewish background, that's people who are not having Jewish mothers. But there's quite a significant group. So you ask me the question, how do I know I'm Jewish? And the answer is, because this is my family. But they say, well, Jesus was Jewish. I like being Jewish. Can't I be Jewish? They don't even know how to be Jewish. But they call themselves Jewish. This is very strange. But I meet people everywhere who think that they're Jewish, but they don't really know if they are or not, or why they're not. Estimates of the population, Jews by religion, 4.2 million. Jews of no religion, in other words, their mothers are Jewish, but they do not practice the Jewish religion, another 1.2 million. Subtotal, 5.3 million, which is the normal estimate for America. And then, non-Jews of Jewish background. Who do you think is a non-Jew of a Jewish background? Me. Because I am now officially excluded from these surveys. But I have a Jewish background, all my family are Jewish. But in this survey, I'm part of this group, non-Jews of Jewish background. Now, I'm as Jewish as anybody else. Probably more Jewish in some ways. But in this survey, they've got another 2.8 million who are not officially regarded as Jewish by the synagogue, but we are part of the Jewish people. And then non-Jews of Jewish affinity, these are the people who say, Jesus was Jewish, I feel Jewish, maybe I'm Jewish. Oy, oy, oy. Confusing. But somehow they're all linked. So there's a total of possible Jews of 9 million. And if you include the children, it's 11.9 million. What does this tell you? And when you really want to know, I think the answer is the same for King David. Do not count. God knows. And if we are Christians who believe that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, who sums up what it means to be Jewish, most of our people are still waiting for the Messiah.
The main problem or factor that the Jewish population in the world is still
Well, all the psychologists would say that when genocide occurs, it takes at least 3 generations to come to terms with that. We are all victims, or the children of victims, and even the way Israel is responding now to the attacks of Hamas, it shows how sensitive we are and how very careful we are that these terrible things that happened to our grandparents and great-grandparents must never happen again. So as a people, especially in different ways, because Europe was directly affected by the Holocaust, America at a distance, and Israel came into being as a sort of one of the very few positive things that happened after the Holocaust. We are all, I think, going through post-traumatic stress disorder. And theologically, we are asking the questions, where was God? Why did he allow this? And how could this happen in Christian country? I come to that in my final lecture on the Holocaust. But it does tell you that we are a surviving people. So we are often careful about assimilation. You know, the 50% intermarriage rate I mentioned. Some Jewish leaders say, oh, this is terrible. I don't actually have that view because I think God is responsible for keeping the Jewish people together. It's his purposes for them. But that tells you we are a very small people, but we are a surviving people. And we often tell our history in a lachrymose way. You know, we are suffering people. And that is makes us gospel resistant as well. Because people say if you become a believer in Jesus, you're betraying your people, you're going to the side of the persecutors. So all these are factors in understanding what makes Jewish identity today. Yeah, one more question, then we have coffee. Yeah, later.
Yeah, it seems to me that the Gentiles will have a hard time to identify who is the Jew.
It's a very good question. And people say, well, you look Jewish and you have a beard and you have a nice nose and things like that. Yeah, I'm a typical Ashkenazi Jew. And you can see this in the family photos. But if you go to Israel, you see people who look Chinese, people who look African, people who look Egyptian, people who look European. And as soon as you start trying to recognize who Jewish people are, you are probably asking the wrong question. So for me, it's very difficult to know who is Malaysian, Singaporean, Chinese. Please forgive me, I will get this wrong. But if you are really called to be a missionary amongst a people, you learn these things so you don't have to ask. And my advice is if you're ever trying to work out if somebody is Jewish, do not say, "Are you Jewish?" Because I'm immediately defensive. Why do you want to know? Are you thinking that I'm a fossil or a museum exhibit? So if you want to know, my advice is say to somebody, are you a Gentile? And if they're not Jewish, they don't really know what you're talking about unless they're an evangelical Christian. And they say, what? What do you mean? And if they are Jewish, they say, no, of course not, I'm Jewish. But learning to identify with your target group, if you're a missionary, is also very important. So you need to become acquainted with Jewish people so you don't even have to ask. And especially in Britain, many of my people, I'm not typically Jewish for British people because I'm quite extrovert. And I'm quite vocal about being Jewish. But most Jewish people in this country, we want to keep quiet about being Jewish because we're afraid of anti-Semitism. And we realise that we are only visitors here, and the British are not always the best friends of the Jews. Some are, the Puritans and the, Lord Shaftesbury and those who really prayed for the Jewish people. But others, they made promises to the Arab nations, and they persecuted the Jews. And there were martyrs, Jews who were martyred in Britain. So it's a difficult question, but the best way is to learn enough so that you don't need to ask. And of course, we've always reacted as Jewish people where people have tried to single us out, because that was what Hitler did. And he tried to come to a racial definition of who the Jews were in order to wipe us out. So we don't like people asking that sort of question. And even the Jewish leaders, when they saw this survey, they said, oh, they're not a Jewish organization, they don't know what they're doing. I think it's good to study it. Yeah, okay, let's pause for coffee.